All right, so this is going to be a quick off-the-cuff video talking about why a flat frequency response matters. I know a lot of people say, flat sounds like crap. Why would you want flat? And, I think that that's kind of a misnomer, because here's what happens is we're not saying that you should have a speaker that makes it sound flat at your listening position, because actually, yes, that will not sound good. What we're trying to say is a flat speaker, meaning a neutral speaker or a transparent speaker, or how else you want to describe it? Neutral?
Yeah. Just a flat on-axis response, nothing going crazy off-axis, just overall a neutral sounding speaker that doesn't do too much or take anything away.
An accurate speaker that measures flat on axis, what that means is that whatever signal is going through it, going in, is actually when you measure it, is coming out. Why is that desirable, right? And keep in mind, I'm also saying that accurate or neutral or flat on axis, I also want the speaker to perform and behave well off axis, right? So we don't want it to be very good on axis and then off axis complete, does something else completely, because that does have an overall effect. But I'm just talking about a well-behaved, good on axis and good off axis speaker. And here's why that's important, right? Why is that something that you want? Because it's accurate. I mean, it's kind of makes sense to me, just logically, right? Why would you want to color the sound? Why would you want to change the sound, right? There's somebody on the other end who kind of figured out, this is how much bass I want this track to have. This is how much treble. This is how I want the mid-range to sound. And so if you have a speaker that's changing it for every single recording, that's an enhancement or maybe a reduction, in my opinion. And why would you want that, right? Why wouldn't you just want to hear it as they want it? Now, of course, there's also personal preference, right? And this is where it gets tricky, because there's accurate, right? So I think, here's the thing. I think baseline flat is a good place to start, right? You can enhance stuff, and what I would recommend is, I wish more companies would do a tilt where you could just kind of raise the bass and lower the treble, right? But as of right now, they have treble and bass, so tone controls that hinge around 1 kilohertz, and that's better than nothing, right? I'll think simpler the better. Almost based on the song, you could easily just turn this knob and kind of adjust. Maybe their recording was a little bit, too much treble for your taste, and that I think makes sense, right? And I also think that it makes sense that, people might adjust those settings. Maybe you're hard of hearing in the higher frequencies. So of course, yeah, you can boost those frequencies just so you can hear them at what you perceive to be a normal level, right? So that all makes sense. But my whole point, and I think a lot of the people who push for flat speakers or a flat frequency response are just saying, this is a good baseline. This is what you should start with. From there, you can change things up, right? The problem is when they start off with a really weird frequency response, now you have to get it to flat in order to change it, right? So that's the thing that's kind of tricky is, basically I'm thinking that you should start with a flat response. Now, why else does that make sense? It makes sense because you want it to sound like the actual thing that it's supposed to sound like, right? So if I record an instrument, right, and then I play it back, accurate is going to sound the best to you, right? The more I can make it sound realistic and how it's supposed to sound, the better it's going to sound to you, right? And that's kind of the thing. I think that Floyd Toole, he talks a lot about the circle of confusion, meaning that you don't know what the person who was recording it, you don't know what they were listening on, you don't know what their mics were doing, right? And then you don't know what your system is doing a lot of times. It might be doing its own thing, and then your room is changing in different ways. That's called the circle of confusion. You don't know what is correct. But I think that if the baseline was neutral, if everybody's aim was for a flat response, then would be getting closer to good communication between what the artist's intent is and what you're receiving on your end, right? So if you have a speaker that's producing a flat response, they're monitoring on speakers that have a flat response. Maybe their microphones, they're aiming for a microphone that is also accurate, right? Now, that doesn't mean that they can't massage it and make it sound a little bit different, right? they're working off accurate, but at least you know that the sound that you're getting is going to be similar to theirs. Now, people are going to say, well, a flat speaker is not going to sound flat in every room. And that is very correct, right? It is going to change from room to room. But what a lot of people have to know is also above the Schroeder frequency, right? There's a transition frequency, right? Most people, it's going to be 500 hertz and above. Below that, there's other things that happen, and we'll go into that. But above that, for the most part, it doesn't vary that much from room to room. Unless you have something in front of the speaker, yeah, that's going to change the sound. But if you have something near a wall, yeah, that's going to change the sound, right? Because of the early reflections. But for the most part, that's the thing that actually stays the most consistent. And I've done an experiment like this where I've had a speaker, I moved it around the room to, different places and kept the distance of the mic to the speaker the same. And what I found was the bass, the mid-range was all over the place. Depending if I had it near a corner, it'd get crazy. But for the most part, above 500 hertz, that kind of stayed pretty much the same. And so that's very interesting. And what does that tell me? I want a speaker that is neutral above that frequency range, right? Because it doesn't really matter so much where I place it, because I want that to be accurate. So for people who say, yeah, it doesn't matter because the room's going to do what it's going to do. Yes, for the most part, except for above that transition frequency, it's a little bit less, we're a lot less room dependent. So what happens below 500 hertz? There's a transition frequency. So in the mid range, where it's not quite what I'm explaining, where it doesn't matter where you place it. And it's also not like the bass frequencies where it's very dependent on where you are. It's somewhere in between, and that's the transition frequency. Now, what happens below that? So in the bass region, right? 200 hertz and below, what happens is that's so room dependent that it's not even fair to compare speakers based on like where they're placed, right? Because if I put a speaker in the center of the room, measure it, and then I put it in the corner and measure it, it's so completely different. It's like you're looking at two completely different speakers. So that's one of the issues I see with some reviewers, is that they'll give you their opinion, their subjective opinion, based on some speakers in their room, and maybe it's placed near a corner, right? And they say, hey, this has a ton of bass. Yeah, it probably does because it's near a corner, right? Pull that forward, and then what happens? And so that's the tricky thing, is it also depends on where they're sitting, right? They could be sitting near a wall, and that also enhances the bass. And so they're giving you their opinion, but they should tell you actually where they're sitting, where the wall is. They should know all the factors so that you on the other end can make a decision based on like, oh, okay, well, I'm not near a back wall, so that doesn't apply to me, right? What you really want to do is take a look at some of these guys like Aaron's Audio Corner and Amir over there at Audio Science Review, and even Audioholics does a good job of measuring, kind of giving you an idea of, some objective data, right? What you want is anechoic data or pseudo-anechoic data in the form of Clipple. And what that will tell you is, what is a speaker doing? Because once you figure out what the speaker is doing by itself, and you understand what your room does, right? So if you understand from your experience, measurement mic comes in handy here. If you know that putting it near a wall enhances the bass, all right? And you know that a rear port will do this and a front port, and you have to kind of get an understanding of your room. That's your part, right? That's what you have to do. Once you get an understanding of that, then you kind of have a good picture of what different speakers will do in your room. The other part that is up to you is you have to know your personal preferences, right? If you like the treble a little bit hot, well, that's your personal preference, okay? That's okay. If you like the bass a little bit hot, well, that's okay too. And so you might find speakers that suit those, right? But again, I still push for a speaker that has a flat frequency response, because those are things that you can actually change in EQ. And the other reason why I say that it should have good behavior off axis, right, is because you can't fix that, right? Whatever it does off axis, so if it's good on axis, you can fix that with EQ. But if it's terrible off axis, you might be making that sound worse, right? So what you want is consistent. So if you improve the on axis response, it also improves the other off axis responses equally. And so you want that to be smooth. There you go. That's how you have a good sounding speaker, right? So I know there's a lot of people who are going to disagree and say, nah, I want my speakers to be, you know, this or that. They want to have some kind of coloration, and that's fine. Yeah, you can do whatever you want, right? You know, that's what I'm saying that you should be able to do with your EQ. But if you want the manufacturer, you want your favorite designer to decide what that sound signature is, hey, that's fine too, right? That's fine too. So the main point of this video was to differentiate between a flat frequency response, which I think is good, versus a flat sound. That doesn't sound good, right? A flat means like it's not dynamic. That's not what I mean. Difference between that and also a flat frequency response in your listening position, right? And just to touch on that real quick, your frequency response in your listening position where you sit should probably be tilted downwards. This way. So have a little bit more bass and the treble should fall off. That's kind of the room interaction that you would expect, right? So a perfectly flat speaker, if you were to put it in the room, you kind of expect it to have a downward tilt, right? And that's why I said, if you're talking about having a flat response in your listening position, actually that's going to sound pretty crappy. That means that you probably have something that has not a lot of bass, right? And with tilted treble to your ears, it's going to sound really just kind of grating. It's going to sound like it doesn't have a ton of bass, and you're not going to like it. So there's a difference. What else? I think that's pretty much it. You know, this is a discussion that I wanted to have for a while, so hopefully that helps you guys. And, you know, it's open to discussion, right? You guys tell me what you think. In my opinion, I think that it's up to the mixing and mastering engineer to determine how something should sound, right? You can have your input on your end by doing your EQ, but doesn't it make more sense to do it, you know, with your EQ rather than have your speaker do it? Because the speaker is set. You can't change it once it's set, right? I mean, you could, but then you have to undo that frequency response so you can put in your frequency. It's just more complicated. So anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Take care. Bye-bye.